Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in. The last episode we left out doing the rear suspension, and this episode we're going to cover everything brakes here in the rear. So we're going to be replacing the rotors, we're going to be replacing the brake pads, all new hardware, and we're going to dress up these calipers. So the basic tools you're going to need for this is a 17mm socket, a 14mm socket, and maybe like a you can use like a 10-inch, or not a 10-inch, a 10mm wrench here. Excuse me. And this type of spreader for your calipers, it's kind of wrenching type. They're really cheap to get. They're probably about $15 to $20. So this is all you need for the back brakes here. So it'll make your life a whole lot easier. And if you have some type of braking bar, that will help you removing the caliper as well. And other tools you might need is you might need a torque wrench. Just because I'm a torque at the spec, it's not necessary. If you can get the two bolts are going to remove off the caliper, just get them on extremely tight. Maybe put some Loctite on them just to be safe. So other than that, we're going to get started. We're going to break this apart, and then I'm going to take this all to the bench, and so I can kind of detail it exactly how this goes together away from the car. So I'm going to start by loosening the caliper off the mount back here, and that's the two 17mm bolts. I forgot to mention that we're going to also replace these lines with some steel braided coated lines, and I'll show you once we get to the bench what we're using. And I'm going to bleed the whole full system, so just stick with me to the end of the video. I'm going to do a full bleed on the system and how it's done. Now there's different ways of changing your brake, of course. You can push the piston out here and slowly drive oil back in. That's if you want to do it real quick. It's not going to hurt anything. Now, I would suggest doing it this way, is actually loosening up the bleeder screw here and then pressing the pistons in and letting some of that oil kind of drain out. Because at the end of the day, there's oil built up in the caliper, and that's old burnt oil. You know, that doesn't get recirculated through the system, so you want to get rid of that, and just to keep a full clean system. Now you want to use a breaker bar for this. I have an old torque wrench that works just as fine. Of course, I don't use this. It's just an old one. I'm not able to calibrate it no longer, so it's good for a breaker bar. Alright, so all I wanted to do here is just to get them loose, to break them loose, and then I can switch over to a more manageable tool. Just a standard wrench here. Socket here. Alright, so I'm going to do now is I'm going to loosen the brake hose out, and I got my oil pan here. I'm just going to let it stream down and just let it kind of drain out by itself by gravity. By doing this, it's either you got to plug the hose at some point, or make sure that your reservoir up in the engine bay is completely full at all times. So you got to keep track of it. You also can put a plug in there if you need to. With me, I'm just going to let it drain. I got an extra tank on top of the reservoir. I want all this fluid to kind of flush out anyway. Now I'm going to go ahead and just remove the caliper off the rotor. Alright, so for now I'm going to let the caliper kind of drain itself into my oil tank here. I'll make sure that all of it's out of there, and then we'll move that over to the bench and I'll show you what we're going to do, what to look for to inspect it, and to clean it up and do the reinstall. Remember, we're still going to replace these rotors, so you got to make sure your emergency brake is off for them to come out. They should come out freely. Now, if they do not come out freely, if you look on your rotor here, and this one's supposed to have the little rubber grommet here, and it's missing on this car. But right here, if you can rotate your tire or your wheel assembly here, where this hole here is facing straight down to the floor, you're able to get a screwdriver in there. And I don't think I'm going to be able to show you here, but trust me, it's here. There's a little gear that you're going to be able to access through this hole once everything's turned over. So there's a little gear in here that you can turn. And you can I can actually feel it with my finger. So basically what you do is you get a screwdriver in this hole and you kind of turn it. And I think if you just make it one full revolution, it'll loosen up the brakes for you. You should be able to slide the rotor right out. Alright, so we're here at my new workbench. Finally, I got a new workbench in the garage here that I have some more room in here to work on. So we're here finally. Hopefully it shows, everything shows up better on camera than it did before. But upon the inspection of the caliper here, I was looking at the brake pads first, and I see some uneven wear between the two on both sides here. They also have like a slant wear to them, so that tells me something. So what I did is I went ahead and inspected the rest of it here, and I noticed right off the bat there's a piece of hardware missing from here, and there should be a spring that goes in below here that helps spread out the pads every time you brake, so it'll spread it out this way, and it's completely missing. So that kind of solves the issue of the brake pads looking worn incorrectly. So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to break this down. Pull this pin out here. Just a little pin. Throw that aside. I'm going to try to get this pin out if there's not too much junk in the way. If not, I'll knock it out. There we go. It'd help if I just go ahead and unlatch this piece down. Slide this guy out first. Still stuck in there. There we go. So move this aside. We're going to replace all this hardware in this video. So one thing, the first thing to inspect if you're going to use all the existing hardware is this pin here. This pin has a tendency to actually bend here in the middle, and it'll be crooked. So inspect that first. Usually I can tell that this one's crooked just slightly. It's got a bend to it. So inspect this first. Then we're going to go ahead and pull out the pads. We're not going to inspect these. Just what I was telling you before, you can see the wear. There's more wear at the bottom than there is on the top. So there was something wrong going on here. We'll toss these. We don't need them. Alright, so this next inspection, and I don't know how clear it's going to show up on camera here. I apologize. But is the rubber seal right in here for your pistons. You gotta make sure that they're not dry rotted for sure. Make sure you'll be able to tell if there's a leak right away, because it'll look like this on all your parts. So just inspect them, feel around them, make sure they're not cracked, they're not brittle, not dry rotted, all that stuff. And these feel very good, so we're thankful for that. So it's either you're going to have to rebuild those or just go ahead and buy a new caliper. Either way, it's up to you. So the first thing I do is to separate, we have to separate the two pistons, and so this design is kind of weird. Usually you'll have dual pistons here on the back side and nothing here up front, but this one has pistons on both sides here. Is I put the tool in here and I'll compress them both in at the same time. So I'll show you how to do that without me talking, and that might work. So I'm going to go ahead and use this handy tool, and I'm going to go ahead and spin it out. You can kind of see here how it works. So you can spin it out. And what I want to do, I want to spin it off enough so I'm able to catch the inside and the outside of the caliper. That might help. And so you can see here I pressed in the front piston first, all the way down flat. Now it's going to give me enough space to fit the tool in here and decompress the other piston. So that's pretty much it. It's pretty simple. See, they're both compressed fully in, and that's what we got to do. So the next thing for me to do in here is I'm not going to put this onto the car the way it is. So I'm going to go ahead and degrease this. I'm going to scrub it and then degrease it again and see if we can get this thing clean, and then we're going to dress it up. Alright, so check it out here. I got it all pretty much cleaned up as the best I can possibly get it. It's a very important step to get paint applied to this, to get all the grease you can possibly get off of here. It will show up in your paint if you don't. So this is kind of the area where it takes you a little bit more time, unfortunately. So what I used was a whole can of brake cleaner, some wire brushes, and even a little wire brush like this for your drill. And just kind of went around it, and then I took some sandpaper to some areas that I couldn't get to. So it's a long process, I know. It's kind of a pain. It's better to start from a new part, but I figured these are still good to go. So anyway, one more thing I gotta do is I'm gonna go ahead and sand this down. I want this flat area here to be very smooth. So. Alright, so I think that's pretty good there. It's very smooth. It's what I need. Next is I'm going to go ahead and tape everything off that I actually don't want painted. For instance, the backside. I'm going to be replacing these, so I don't care if the valve, I don't care if I paint this. I'm going to leave that on there like this. But you want to block off this. You don't want nothing going into your caliper. I would probably tape off these areas here, so you have a clean main surface to the car. And then areas inside here that I'm going to try to show here on camera. So right in here on both sides, this area here, here, and here, and here, you don't want those painted. We're going to grease these areas for your pads, along with this area here, and it's all four sides here, here, there, and there. So, and then of course you don't want to paint your rubber on your piston here either. So you can probably tape off all this area here. You're not going to see it when you put the brake pads in anyway, so it's not a big deal. Alright, so this is what the taping job looks like. You can tell all the blue is tape. The areas that I don't want painted, of course, back here too as well. I don't know if you can see that. It's sloppy. It's just real sloppy, but it's all you basically need. Once you spray it, it's going to hold in place, and then you can peel it off later. So now I'm going to go ahead and start with this area first. I'm just going to use some rubbing alcohol to clean it up. You can use other things as well, but alcohol works just as fine right off the shelf. So I'll do this portion first, let it dry. And so we're going to start the process. I'm going to paint this area a pearl white first. I'm going to go with a light spray just to build up some pixelate the paint a little bit, just so it has a good bond for the next coat. And then the second coat, of course, is going to be another light one, just kind of build it up. And then the third coat will be white. Not white. And then the third coat will be a little bit more of a medium wet coat. And then we'll let that dry. We're going to put a decal on here, let it stick. And then we're going to go ahead and hang this up. And then we're going to start the process of the paint. I'm going with red, of course. And it's from Dupa Colors, the stuff I'm using here. Now, it's going to be the same procedure. One light coat, the second coat's going to be light as well, and then the third is going to be your final coat, so it's going to be more of a medium wet. So you don't want this thing to drip, and if you do that process, you won't get any runs. If you get any runs, it's not a big deal. You can clean it up later. Keep in mind, this is a long process. If you're going to do this, it takes about 3 hours for this to dry, to be able to handle it. And still, sometimes it takes a little bit longer depending on the temperatures you're at. So after I spray it, I'm going to put over some heat lamps for a few hours and see if it helps out, so we can get this thing assembled. It says the full cure of this is about 7 days, so just keep that in mind. Alright, you can tell I put a little decal on here after the white paint has dried here. It's just a simple little decal that it's almost like a sticker is what it is. So now we're ready to paint. Alright, so we're back over here at the bench. It's pretty much dry where I can actually handle this now. So it's now a matter of time of taking out all our masking and assembling this guy to put back in the car. So our little detail there. And then remove our masking that we had on here before. Alright, so what I'm going to do before we assemble this is get some caliper grease here. This is stuff I use. I'm just going to get a little bit here on the brush. Nothing extreme. So we're going to lubricate these edges that we did not paint here. This is going to happen on both sides. Just a little bit here. It doesn't have to be real heavy, just real light. Here at the bottom. I'm also going to lube up the piston cylinder here. Alright, so now it's time to put the brake pads in here. Put it front facing here. These are the pads I'm using here. Just so you're curious. There's a part number to them. And I got a new hardware kit as well. You can get it from AutoZone. Here's a part number for that. Comes with everything you need. New retaining rod, spring hold down, or actually this is the spring out hold down, and this is the hold down for the pads. And then the little clip. And it also gives you a little clip for this guy here. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to drop in the pads first. So just drop right down. Might get a little bit tricky to kind of hold it together here, but I'm going to put this in just to hold it all together. That little clip, here we go. Get that guy in here. Okay, so here comes the tricky part. This part goes in this way, and it's going to slip under that middle section here. Okay. Now this guy kind of goes around here first. It's going to sit like so. Okay, and this keeps the pads from hitting the rotor all the time. Once you brake, it'll squeeze it and it'll help push it right back out, so you don't get premature wear on your pads. So I mean by the tricky part is this, let me see if I can explain this. This piece here has to go kind of in between here. Okay, so that's what it looks like so far. See how it fits right in this groove here of the brake pad. Make sure everything is lined up here in the front as well. So this is the part where this little lip right here needs to come right up on top of here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a little bit of pressure because we got to kind of lift without bending. You don't want to bend this part because it's got a little bit of a spring action to it. So it's just a matter of doing them all at one time. Kind of pull, kind of guide it here. Probably got my hands in the way. I apologize. Alright, so I'm pretty happy where it's at there. Now I'm just going to try to spring it on like this. As long as it snaps on there like this, you are set. This thing is ready to go. So just make sure everything's nice and tight. And here I'm able to kind of pick it up like this, and that's how tight it should be. Okay. Alright, so next is I'm going to assemble our new line. Like I said, I was going to do the steel braided. And it's got this nice coating on it as well. It's a pretty nice set. So just remember, I guess I should mention our old brake line here. You can tell that there's this little kind of washer right here. Let me show you. I got one here on the shelf. So it's got this little guy on here. This is what the factory uses. It's aluminum. They use this as a crush washer. Kind of fits around here. It's really thin, so I'm not going to use this. I prefer copper. So you go ahead and get a copper kit off the shelf at your part store. It's a Dorman kit here. There's the part number there. So it's got different size washers you can use. I mean, it should all work, but they got you know, they might have a real thin one and a little bit of a thicker one, maybe a little bit larger. I like to put the thin ones on the inside here first, and then the kind of the larger ones on the outside. I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Find our bolt here. I'm going to start with the larger one on the outside. And I'm not going to torque this down. We'll torque it down once we get to the car. Let's just kind of get it started here, and then we'll take it over. And that's good there. That's exactly how it's going to sit on the cart too as well, because you're going to line up this line with this hole. The stock one fit like this. Okay, so just a little bit of clarity there. Anyway, I think we're ready to go here. Looks like I got this thing all dirty, unfortunately. Alright, we'll go to the car and we'll get this on there. I want to show you real quick the setup I have here for the brake fluid before I put the caliper on. So I have this system set up here so it gives me a constant flow into the reservoir. So once I start bleeding the brakes, it'll keep it full for me and I don't have to keep an eye on it. Alright, so before I get started here, I'm going to put some Loctite on these bolts real quick. So these are ready to go. I'm going to get the new rotors on real quick. Make sure that this hole here lines up with the hole here, okay? Good, now it's time for the caliper. So now I'm going to tighten down those two bolts to about 75 foot-pounds. Now we're going to go ahead and connect a new line here. And put a new clip. We got to make sure this is tight enough. Once we start bleeding the brakes and we get full pressure onto the caliper here, we'll check for leaks. Next is to tighten down the fluid bolt on the caliper in the back. And since we're using copper crush washers, I would say if you're going to use a torque wrench, it's probably about 25 foot-pounds or so. Alright, so now I'm going to hook up the air bleeder to our bleed valve here in the back. Make sure it's all the way on like this. Curious what I'm using is just a pneumatic one. This guy here. It's a one-man type of operation here, so works really well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I want to do see if this is going to capture on camera. I don't know. You're going to be able to see some bubbles coming through here. And we got to get to the point where we don't see any bubbles. So I'm going to do is I'm just going to crack it open a little bit. I'm going to give it some suction with the hose here. And the whole idea is I want to try to get the fluid moving up into the caliper to fill the voids. Go along, I'm gonna kind of like slow bleed it and see. I'm just worried about trying to get as much air as I can possibly get out of it. It might take several tries, but it'll get there. Alright, I'm liking like what that's looking like right there. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna close this valve. I'll close it real quick, and then what I'm gonna do is I'm going to go into the car, I'm going to pump the brake a few times, and then I'm going to come back and do a bleeding procedure another time. Okay, I pumped it about 8 times or so. So I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and crack it back open. I'm going to go ahead and let any air that wants to escape from here. What I'm doing is I'm forcing the fluid into the caliper now and hopefully compressing that air inside here. So I'm going to go ahead and bleed it a little bit more. And I'll put this up like this so you can actually see any bubbles that come out. There's some. So basically what you want is as soon as you start siphoning the oil out of your caliper here, as soon as the bubbles stop and you're able to pull fluid just fine through the tube into its holding reservoir, that means we've got these things fully bled and all the air is out of the system. And we're good here, so I'm going to go ahead and tighten up the bleeder screw. And so now it's just a matter for you to go take for a test drive and see if it pans out. Break in these brake pads and making sure they stop first of all. So that kind of wraps up this video. Thanks for hanging out with me. We're going to be doing the front ones here soon as well. Of course, the front suspension is coming too. So thanks for joining me. Hope this helps you out, and stay tuned to the next one.